Hey guys, and welcome back. Today, we're going to be making the Mandalorian helmet from the Disney Plus series, The Mandalorian. Alright, so Mando's helmet is very cool looking. It kind of follows that iconic Mandalorian style, and as you may know, I already made a Boba Fett helmet in the past. I'd say go check out the video where I made this, but I was like 12 years old when I made this actually, so it's not very good. It doesn't actually fit me entirely, so I'm excited to make a new one. Now we're going to be making this, of course, out of EVA foam. So this is that 1/2-inch floor mat foam. You might have seen it before, and when you're working with this stuff, the first thing you need is a pattern for your helmet. You could do this yourself, but luckily enough for us, Din Djarin over at Punish Props already designed the patterns for both a Mandalorian helmet and a Boba Fett helmet, and he gives them away for free. He has a full, in-depth, comprehensive video where he shows you how to make a Boba Fett helmet, and then also shows how to modify that to make it a Mandalorian helmet. So definitely go check out the video on his channel. But since he already has the patterns, and they are pretty good looking, I figured might as well use them to make our Mandalorian helmet today. We're going to be doing a little bit of different things, mainly with the way I paint it. So let's get started. So I printed these patterns off of his website, which I will link in the description below for you guys, but I noticed that his were just a bit too large, so I actually scaled them down to about 85% of the original size, which did end up being too small in the end, but you'll see. And then I traced them on down with a Sharpie to my floor mat foam. Make sure you mark everything that's on these patterns. There's some letters that indicate which sides need to glue together, as well as those little dashes. Those are your registration marks, which help you line up the two pieces of foam when you go to glue them together. Also, keep in mind that these patterns are only for one side of the helmet. It's all for the left half, so you will need to flip them and trace everything twice if you want a full helmet. And after that, I proceeded to cut them out with a sharp knife. Cutting foam dulls your blade really quickly, so make sure you keep it sharp. And also pay attention to the angle of your blade. Most of the time, you want to keep it 90 degrees straight up and down when you cut the pieces, except a couple of marked spots on the cheeks where you actually want a bevel. So you try to cut at about a 45-degree angle, and that gives you an angle that looks like this. I then hit all of the foam pieces with a heat gun, which is like a much hotter version of a hair dryer. And I bent them a little just so they would have a little bit of a curve that will help when we go to glue them together. Alright, so now that I've got all of my pieces cut out and heat formed, they're looking really nice, and I think we are finally ready to glue them together. So for the glue, I'm going to be using contact cement. If you're familiar with other foam videos, then you already know what this is, but it's some pretty gnarly stuff if you've never worked with it before. So the basic way it works is you spread it on both sides of the materials that you want to stick together, but you don't attach them right away. No, you gotta wait a few minutes for it to get tacky. Then you can stick the two of them together and they bond on contact, and it's super duper strong. You're actually more likely to rip the foam in half than you are to rip the glue seam apart, so. Okay, so I'm about to glue together the cheek pieces now, and those angled cuts from earlier are exactly what's going to make that iconic Mandalorian cheek shape. So, here, you can watch this happen. Wow, That is very interesting how it comes together. You can see the back side there, it's kind of funky, but out here, it's that perfect cheek shape. Yeah, this thing is coming together. It's almost completed. Alright, so all of the foam pieces put together, this helmet is looking pretty cool. The only problem with it is, it's just too small. And I feel it's also too short proportionally. It looks something more like a Magneto helmet now, but I need to try again. As I mentioned, the patterns for this were actually scaled down from the original 100% to about 85%, which I thought would work with my calculations, but you know what? It didn't quite work out, and so I resized my patterns to 90% of the original, and also I extended the bottom section of the helmet about an inch because it just felt off. And here is the new one I made, which definitely looks much better, especially when it has room to fit on my head. I made this off camera because it just follows the exact same steps as I already showed you, but we'll continue the rest of the build with this guy. The next step was to fill in the seams of the helmet with quick seal, which is like a flexible caulk. Now this is sort of optional, especially if you do a really good job in lining up your seams nice and flush, but if they're not perfect, like mine, this helps a little bit with hiding your seams so that after you paint it, it all looks like one piece. And then you can smooth it out with water and sand it down after it dries. Okay, so quick sealed and sanded down nice and smooth. I'm really liking the look of this, but it's pretty much just a base Mandalorian helmet at this point. There's a few more detail pieces that we need to add on to this that will make it look like Mando's helmet from the show. I know I'm saying Mando when he does have a name, but when I say Mando, I'm referring to the main character in the show, okay? Not any other Mandalorian. A couple of these pieces were included in Bill's pattern, which we will just cut out and sand down or shape however we need for each specific piece. I cut these pieces out of the 1/2-inch foam, but then I cut these side pieces out of some 6mm foam because they look a little thinner. But then this piece has a bevel on it, as well as this guy, so we will be sanding them down with a rotary tool. You could sand them down by hand or try to carve at them with a knife, but I have a rotary tool and that'll just expedite the process, so I'm gonna use that. But remember, always exercise caution, safety first. There's a little vent thing on the back side of the helmet, and I made that out of some thin 2mm craft foam. I glued these pieces onto the helmet with more contact cement. There's just two more details to finish up on this helmet, and that is a strip across the front brow area, and I'm gonna make that out of more 2mm foam, same stuff that I use for the vent back here, and also the mohawk piece on the top, and I think I'm gonna make that out of some 4mm foam because I already have this nice roll of it. There's a couple of engraved lines on the mohawk, and I have kind of a cool trick to do this where I scored a line into the foam, not cut all the way through, and then when you hit it with a heat gun, it actually makes those cuts open up, and they look pretty cool. Then there is a beveled edge on either side of it, and I did that with the rotary tool. I am incredibly pleased with how this helmet is looking, and the entire build on it itself is complete. The only thing we need to do now is paint it. The first step in the painting process is sealing the foam. So you could do this with school glue or epoxy or many different other things, but what I'm going to be using is Plasti Dip. This is like a vinylized rubber spray paint that clings right onto the foam, and it seals it and also remains flexible after it dries. So that's what I'm gonna coat it with. So any other tutorial videos I've seen from a number of other people say that when you want to paint something with a metallic color, you want to do that over top of a gloss black base coat. That way you'll have just the most reflective sheen to it, and that's pretty much exactly what we want for this Mandalorian helmet. Unfortunately, Plasti Dip dries on the foam with a matte black color. So we could go over this again with a gloss black, but in fact, Plasti Dip makes a glossifier paint, which has the same properties as Plasti Dip, but it's just a gloss clear coat. So we are gonna hit it with that next. Alright, so while that is drying, I'll talk just a little bit about here the metallic silver color that I want to use on the helmet, because that's honestly one of the most important pieces of Mando's costume itself. In the show, the silver color is super shiny, super reflective, and that poses an interesting challenge because it's different in pretty much every type of lighting. It's lighter outside, it's darker in his ship, and that can kind of give you some leeway with what color you want to use. You can actually buy the same color that they used to make his costume in the show. It's called Alumiluster by Imperial Surface, and it goes for about $400 or $500 a pint. So you need several $1,000s if you're making a full costume. So we're not gonna go for that. We're gonna go for a cheap option, and that is your $4 rattle can of spray paint. There's a lot of different options of silver spray paints, and I have a few that I already had on hand here. This first one is pretty similar color. It's like a pewter, and I like it. It's actually the same color I used on my Aquaman trident in the past, but it has kind of a hammered texture to it, and it's not very reflective. So the next one is the classic aluminum color. I've used this on just about anything I paint silver, but it's quite light and also not super reflective. And I figured whether you're going to go lighter or darker, we can pretty much always make it darker with weathering. But the main thing we can't change is how reflective it is. So I think we're gonna go with the most reflective paint that Rust-Oleum makes, and that is this mirror color. I really like it. It's gonna be lighter than it is in the show, but that's okay because we will be weathering it down after. And now this helmet is shiny and chrome. I really love the color. Yes, it is definitely lighter than it is in the show, but I'd say this is like the freshly forged brand new Beskar helmet. And as you know, in the show, he gets pretty beat up along the way, so we are going to weather this helmet now. You could do this by watering down some black acrylic paint, which you just kind of smudge into the low areas and wipe off of the high points, but I am going to be using black shoe polish. I've heard that this has a much cooler look. It's more like grease when you're putting it on the silver paint that you're trying to replicate metal, so I'm super excited to try it out. I think I'm just gonna cover the whole thing and see what happens. I went section by section, covering the entire helmet with the shoe polish, but then pretty quickly wiping it away with a paper towel, leaving just a little bit to make the helmet darker and a decent bit in some of the lower areas where grime would build up. Alright, so this is it after one coat of shoe polish, and it made a difference, but Beskar is still a darker metal than this, so we're just gonna keep hitting it with more layers of shoe polish until I think it looks right. I played around with different amounts of polish in some different areas until I was happy with the look. And then the piece surrounding the vent on the back, I noticed is actually still a little bit lighter of a metal, so I just went and painted that over again with some silver acrylic paint. And finally, after 3 coats of shoe polish with a little more or a little less in some areas, I am extremely happy with the color on this helmet. It's still pretty reflective, as you can see. My studio lights shining in kind of add some different sheen to the top, but I think I will just seal this all in with a final coat of clear gloss. It has now been glossed, and we can rip out this tape that I had in here. That was just to hold these pieces in the right position, but we are ready for our last step, which is going to be the visor. So on my Boba Fett helmet, I just took that clear plastic from a 2-liter soda bottle and then colored it black with a Sharpie, which left a tint that you can still sort of see out of. That totally worked if you want to try that, but what most Mandalorian cosplayers use is those replacement welding visors, which are tinted black. Unfortunately, they've been going out of stock and are much harder to come by even online, which is kind of funny to me that the release of a Star Wars TV show makes welding visors go out of sale, but hey, there's a lot of Mandalorian cosplayers out there. But what I am going to be trying today is just using one of these clear face shields. These are everywhere right now, as you know, and this one actually has a shark fin on it, which is pretty cool. And then to color it black, I picked up this translucent black tinted spray paint, which you can get from an automotive store. It's used for tinting lights or windows, so you should still be able to see out of it, hopefully, and we are just going to paint this. After painting, it definitely looks black, but the vision in it isn't quite as well as I would have hoped, but I can still make out some lights and shapes and such. I trimmed it down and carefully glued it into the helmet, trying to keep the cheeks symmetrical. And yes, I know it goes just a little bit shorter than it should. This was a kid-size face shield that I had bought, but because it's just hot glued there, I can always rip it out and replace it at any time. And with that, this helmet is fully complete, looking pretty awesome. And now there's just one last thing I have to say. This is the way that you make a Mandalorian helmet. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to hit that like button and share it with your friends. If you have any questions on this build, as well as your requests for future costumes or props, make sure to leave them in the comments section down below. And I have this helmet still lying around, so what should I do with it? But make sure to subscribe for new videos here on this channel.